We've been waiting a while and not eating, right? All right, I can't lie. I just downed a burger in like record time, chat. We went one bun on it so we could get ready and get started for this PoE stream here in about 30 seconds. I know of a thing that will be announced today. I don't know all the things. Also, for full disclosure, I am not sponsored for this stream, but I am sponsored for a handful of tweets and next week's stream when the league launches. Okay? So don't come after me, FCC. All right? I fully disclose this. Jesus. I wonder how, this should just be the league, right? Because we got a lot of PoE 2 stuff last time.
Hi, I'm Chris Wilson from Grinding Gear Games.
There's the statue,
Welcome to our live stream, and thanks so much for joining us today.
I bought that statue.
Our team had a lot of fun putting together Path of Exile's 3.15 expansion, and we've got a lot to share with you. Today's live stream is a busy one.
Nice.
We'll start by revealing the details of this expansion's new challenge
gems?
league. Then we'll show you how this expansion is going to dramatically shake up Path of Exile's metagame in a big way. Thirdly, we'll talk about our plans to make Path of Exile
at least
more
one of those will be good.
Some of the adrenaline and terror that you may recall from the good old days of closed beta. Next up, we're going to talk about Path of Exile Royale, the 100-player Battle Royale mode that we experimented with back in 2018. We'll be launching a restored and revamped version of Royale today, once our question and answer session with Ziggy D has concluded.
That's the thing that I knew about, chat.
Anyway, there's a lot to discuss, so let's get started with the trailer for Path of Exile's next expansion.
Many centuries ago, our people traveled to this accursed continent. We return to reclaim our lost relics. But Rayclast grips its secrets tightly.
Who the hell are these people?
We must wrench them from its grasp.
Oh God. We're building something. I don't know, chat.
You know violence. We know trade. Retrieve our relics and we'll strike a deal. We will follow the path of our forebears to discover their unknown fate.
Huh. Oh my God, it was straight up Frozen Orb. That was straight up Frozen Orb, dude.
They wait, shrouded in darkness, for one who may finally challenge them.
Whoa.
Wealth and power will be yours, should you survive our expedition.
Okay. All right. Okay. I mean, 19 new skills is a lot of new skills that could all be bad. So we'll probably just play Toxic Rain. But hey, there's new skills, right? We got new skills, chat.
All right. I've got a lot to tell you about. Let's start with the Expedition League itself. Long ago, Kalguran explorers came to Rayclast in the hope of colonizing it.
Turn it up.
Rayclast did what it does best, and they never returned. In the Expedition League, you will meet a group of Kalgurans who have set out on an expedition to investigate the fate of their ancestors and recover special ruined artifacts they left behind.
New
The
currency.
ancient Kalgurans underestimated the dangers of Rayclast, and this new expedition is no exception. They need your help to protect them from the undead that rise at their expedition
Those
sites.
shadows probably going to be an FPS
As you
hog.
travel through Rayclast, you'll encounter the Kalgurans at sites they believe their ancestors attempted to settle in the past. By the time you get there, they will have marked the site with signs indicating where chests are buried, holes indicating where their ancestors lie, and will have possibly unearthed some remnants of past Kalguran settlement.
I think he's saying cowgirls,
chat.
chat.
The Kalgurans have found that the most
Cowgirls,
effective way to excavate these
Kalgurlan.
sites is with explosives. And that's where you come in. You'll place a chain of explosives across the expedition site, carefully planning what each blast is going to unearth.
Okay, that doesn't look too bad to set up.
Once you push the plunger, any undead freed by the explosions rise from the ground and the slaughter begins. Some of these fallen Kalgur are more difficult and rewarding than others, and have been indicated with special markers.
It's a lot of chests to click.
Once you have defeated the army of undead, you're free to open all of the chests you unearthed and claim your rewards. It's up to you to decide where to place the chain of explosives to maximize your gains. Do you unearth a lot of monsters? Do you unearth more special monsters? Or do you go for the chests and try to avoid combat?
Huh.
The ancient Kalguran explorers built structures on Rayclust, and you may encounter remnants of these at excavation sites. These remnants have various modifiers on them that, when destroyed, apply to monsters and chests unearthed from that
It's a
explosion
lot of
onwards.
clicking, y'all.
Remnants greatly increase drops, but have some very difficult modifiers like immune to physical damage. You'll need to be very careful with your decision of which remnants to chain your explosives through, as they substantially ramp up the difficulty and rewards of the encounters. Speaking of rewards, there's a lot of cool stuff to find. Alongside valuable equipment and currency items are Kalguran artifacts and logbooks, which we'll talk about soon.
I like that weapon.
The
That
Kalguran
sword.
traders have made this expedition to Rayclast in order to recover their ruined artifacts. There are
Never
many
mind,
different
that's
types
just an
of
artifact.
artifacts, and each of the Kalgurans is interested in a different set of them, with a unique way they want to trade them from you. For this expansion, we really wanted to play with the idea of having NPCs that want to trade with you in different ways. So we have themed their behaviors around the concepts of gambling, bartering, upselling, and exchanging. Let's meet the Kalgurans.
Let's meet the cowgirls.
Tuyen is a mercurial trader who maintains a positive outlook as long as he can, but if you cross a line, his temper changes quickly. Tuyen offers you items with unreasonably high prices, but he's happy to haggle. You can always buy the item at the price he's offering, but if you offer a lower price, he might accept it, counteroffer, or withdraw the item entirely if he is offended by your lowball. He also occasionally sells currency items, so it's worthwhile keeping some of the artifacts he's looking for on hand just in case you see an opportunity. Grog is an average man pushed into Rayclast's dangers. He's helpful, concerned, and a bit fearful. He is very happy for you to do the fighting so that he can stay safe on the sidelines. He loves making deals and
A
trying
lot
to
of
upsell
gamba.
you. If you buy one of the items that Grog offers, he'll try to offer you a more complex deal where he improves the item via crafting. If you accept this deal, he'll try to upsell you again and again until you eventually walk away with your purchase. If you can't afford one of these incremental upgrades, you can leave and come back later with enough ruined artifacts to cover the cost. Because you don't get to supply your own starter item for this process, and have to select an item with promise from the range that he offers, his incremental crafting upgrades are priced rather cheaply.
Okay.
Gwenin is a cynical gambler who claims that luck depends on how hard you believe. So you really need to convince yourself that you're going to get that headhunter. If you don't, it's your fault. Gwenin shows you a set of base types with unknown properties.
Diablo.
When you gamble by buying one,
It's
you
Diablo.
receive a random item of that base
Oh,
type
that's
back.
fucked.
It could easily be a random magic item that you have no use for, but can sometimes be a valuable rare or unique
That's fucking
item.
Diablo, y'all.
It's probably best to prioritize gambling on base types that are most relevant to your character. Once you have exhausted all the items that interest you, it's possible to use a specific new currency item to re-roll the gamble window to a set of new items of your current level.
That's straight Diablo.
Sometimes a base type shows up that is a lot more expensive than it would otherwise be, and gambling on this item has a higher expected value than normal. You're taking the risk, though, that it could still be junk.
It's a belly. Oh, my God. dude.
Danig, Warrior Scald, is the heart
Actually, I
of the
don't think that
expedition.
could have been.
Its brave leader and lawmaster. Danig is interested in specific types of ruined artifacts and wants to trade these from you for a variety of options, such as currency that lets you reroll vendor inventories, logbooks, or artifacts that other Kalguran traders are looking for. You can talk to the traders in the wild, in town, or in your hideout. They grant you access to your expedition locker, which is like the heist locker, a lockbox for league-specific
Nice.
items, which can be accessed in all three places also.
Glad to see
We're adding the
that.
affinity system to these lockers. Among the many relics of the ancient Kalgurans you might find at their expedition sites are logbooks. These ancient books chronicle the locations that their ancestors visited in their exploration of Rayclast. A logbook item can be rolled to have a set of explicit mods, like an endgame map. Each location within
Like
the
that?
logbook has its own implicit mods, as well as a theme that controls what types of remnants can be found there.
Fan of that.
Talk to Danig in your hideout and give him a logbook you have found to go on an expedition to one of the locations it describes. These are all exotic places that no exiles have ever traveled to before.
New portal.
Just like how a blighted map was one giant blight encounter with no natural monsters, the expedition you go on from a logbook is one giant expedition. Expeditions from logbooks are not only different because of their large size, but because there are special objects that you can interact with using explosives. For example, trees that contain monsters or items, passageways that reveal
little
chests or
delve.
bosses, and so on.
It's Delvey.
Speaking of bosses, there are some formidable ones for you to seek out, and a set of valuable new unique items and base types that can only come from expedition content. The Kalguran people are not from Rayclust, so their items do not have the same defensive properties that ours do. Instead of armor, evasion, and energy shield, they have ward.
What?
This new base type is a pair of boots that grants ward and can get mods that improve it. The way that ward works is that you have a certain amount of it, and that amount is fully deducted from the first incoming hit that you receive. Your ward is then disabled and takes 5 seconds to re-enable. At that point, the next hit you receive is substantially mitigated in the same way. It's quite a different style of defensive property and works very well in conjunction with systems like evasion, block, or dodge.
Interesting.
As the undead enemies you unearth in expedition encounters are fallen Kalguran explorers, they also have a ward rather than traditional defenses. This unique helmet allows you to go all in with ward as a defensive option for your character. It causes all increases to energy shield to affect your ward instead, grants you a bunch of ward, and helps it recover faster. This other unique helmet is also on a new base type that grants ward instead of other defense types, but its properties don't interact with
What is
ward.
Battle Mage?
Instead, it prevents you from dealing critical strikes and grants you Battle Mage, which adds spell damage equal to the damage of your main hand weapon.
Whoa!
The new base types and uniques I showed you here are just some of the ones you'll be able to discover when you play next week.
Okay.
So that's the Expedition League. Each of the developers I have spoken to has liked a different aspect of it, but I have really personally been enjoying the different trade mechanics offered by the Kalguran NPCs. The gamble window takes me back 20 years
I'm
on a
kinda into
nostalgic
this.
trip, and Tuyin's haggling manages to capture the intense feeling I get when negotiating. And anyone who really knows me knows how much I love negotiating. This expansion also
That's
promises
true.
to
That's what they say
massively
about Chris.
shake
He
up
loves
the Path of Exile
negotiating.
metagame. And we're doing that by introducing new gems. Lots and lots of new gems. For quite a while now, the way we have approached new skills in Path of Exile expansions is to make a bunch of gems themed around
Chris
an
walks into a
entirely new
party and
build
people
or
start already
dramatically
negotiating.
augmenting a few existing builds. The blood skills in the Ultimatum expansion are a good example of this. While this approach is great in terms of creating interesting new builds, it doesn't always affect every character game-wide. In order to achieve this big metagame shakeup, we've come up with a crazy idea for the Expedition expansion.
Oh god, here we
Adding
go.
a gigantic pile of new gems at once, spread among as many different playstyles as possible. Each of these gems can of course be used by many different classes.
I saw a
but
totem
we
thing
used
in
the
there.
list of 19 ascendancy classes for inspiration when planning these gems. Our goal here is that regardless of which build you're playing, there will be new gems that you can add to your character. Let's go through the 19 new skill and support gems.
All right.
The Earthbreaker support gem can be linked to any slam skill. Upon use, it summons an ancestor totem that uses that slam on your behalf. In this example, we've created a build that summons multiple ancestor totems that each wield tectonic slam.
That looks
As you
strong.
can see, this build covers a large area in fiery death while you get to stay out of harm's way.
Oh, I
This
like
is a
that.
powerful option for chieftains in particular due to the various totem bonuses available on their ascendancy
Oh,
passive.
baby.
Adept players will also be wondering if the Earthbreaker support allows you to create leap slamming totems, and the answer is absolutely. As with other ancestor totems, the Earthbreaker support also provides a buff to you, granting some increased area of effect
Amen.
with melee skills. Rage Vortex
Chat,
provides
please
a new way
only
to
use
consume your
Poggies.
rage, unleashing a whirling
In
vortex
chat
that
from
rapidly
now on.
hits enemies within its range. It gains damage and area of effect based on
Only
how much rage
Poggies.
was sacrificed. The vortex slows down when enemies survive being hit by it, causing it to deal intense damage to tough targets. While you can only have one rage vortex active at a time, characters such as berserkers who are able to generate a lot of rage quickly will find it a great
That
way to
also
augment
looks
their
fucking
damage
sick.
output. Bone Shatter strikes your enemies with a forceful blow. If an enemy is stunned by this attack, a powerful shockwave is released. The area of effect of the shockwave
Well, that
is
looks
determined
boring
by the
as fuck.
duration of the stun you inflicted. Each time you use Bone Shatter against an enemy, you take physical damage yourself and gain a trauma stack. The more stacks you have, the more damage Bone Shatter will deal to both you and your enemies. This self-damage mechanic makes the Juggernaut the ideal class for the skill, because they have easy access to lots of armor to mitigate the downside.
That's a Quinn
Also,
build
the
if I've
Juggernaut
ever
has
seen it.
ascendancy passives that grant increased stun duration, which help make sure the shockwave is as large as possible.
Show me Frozen Orb.
Defiance Banner is a new purely defensive banner skill. While you carry the Defiance Banner, it increases the armor and evasion of nearby allies while reducing the critical strike chance of nearby enemies. It also gains stages while carried near enemies and can be placed on the ground to enhance its effects.
Okay.
When the Defiance Banner is placed, it inflicts a taunt on enemies for a duration based on the number of stages the banner had accumulated while it was carried.
That's nice.
Enemies affected by this taunt also deal less damage to all targets.
You'll probably see a lot of that in hardcore.
The next new skill is Shield Crush, which swipes your shield towards enemies and sends out forceful waves of damage based on the stats of your shield.
Yo, I kind of like
These
that.
waves can shotgun enemies with up to 2 hits at once. So while Shield Crush is
Damage
great
looks
against
like
groups,
shit, though.
it's also effective against single targets and can be used alongside Shield Charge and Spectral Shield Throw. We've improved both of these skills so that the overall aggressive shield build is more powerful. The new Behead support gem can only support strike skills and is basically like a mini headhunter. When a supported strike kills a rare enemy, you'll steal one of its modifiers. Obviously, this gem can't be as crazy as the full headhunter experience, so it comes with some restrictions. Stolen modifiers can persist for 20 seconds, and slaying another rare enemy will replace the modifier you have active. The Behead support gem also grants you more damage against enemies on low life. In conjunction with the Slayer's Bane of Legends ascendancy passive, this bonus really embraces the execution theme of the Behead support. Storm Rain is a new bow skill that fires
that's
arrows that stick
insane.
into the ground. These arrows periodically pulse
Oh, this is
with
like
lightning
Toxic
damage
Rain.
that arcs to nearby arrows. This skill works very well with multiple projectiles because you can quickly set up a large patch of lightning death. Existing ballista skills in Path of Exile pick their own targets, like sentry guns do.
I might play
They'll start
Storm
shooting
Rain.
immediately and will generally target the closest enemies. While this behavior is usually great, sometimes you want fine control over what your ballistas will fire at. The focused ballista support gem causes your ballistas to pick the same targets as you, and they will only fire when you fire your own ranged weapon.
That's pretty
It
sick.
also makes the ballistas fire a lot faster than they otherwise would. This support gem allows you to effectively focus fire on specific enemies such as bosses. Explosive Concoction is quite a novel skill.
Trap
It
builds.
introduces several new concepts that haven't been explored with skills before. Here you can see the Pathfinder throwing an explosive projectile at monsters. Firstly, you may notice that the Pathfinder isn't holding any weapons. This is because Explosive Concoction is the very first ranged skill that can and must be used unarmed. It's also the first skill that directly interacts with the benefits provided by your flasks. When you
What?
throw your Explosive Concoction onto a targeted area, it deals fire damage and uses available charges
Oh
from
my
your
God.
Ruby, Sapphire, and Topaz flasks to grant bonuses based on what
That could
flask
be
charges
crazy.
were used. The skill still works even if you don't have the appropriate flasks or charges to consume, but correctly managing your flask setup can greatly enhance the power of this skill. What we really love about this gem is that it brings to life the idea of throwing your flasks at enemies and having them explode. In conjunction with the flask-focused benefits
Yeah,
provided
look at
by
the
the
flask that
Pathfinder's
it's using.
ascendancy passive skills, we're really excited to see what new playstyles
That's a
are enabled
fucking
by this
expensive
gem.
build.
This is the Ambush skill. It teleports you up to an enemy, blinds them, and exerts your next one-handed melee attack. This exerted attack has a high critical strike chance and multiplier. In addition to this helping your assassinations, you can also use Ambush to quickly re-engage targets after dashing away.
Oh shit.
Voltaxic Burst grants a buff that counts down to 0, triggering a burst of lightning damage around you with a
Oh
portion
my
of that damage
God, I
converted
might-
to chaos damage.
I have to play this.
Enemies slain by your Voltaxic Burst will also explode, dealing chaos damage around them based on their maximum
That's the
life.
build.
You can stack up many Voltaxic Bursts on yourself at the same time. Consider using duration modifiers to modify the timing of the explosion so that you can cast the skill from safety and then move into a strategic position before it explodes.
That's my build.
When you use Blade Trap, you throw out a mechanical device with 2 copies of your weapon attached. These blades spin rapidly in a circle a set number of times, dealing damage to anything they pass through.
Wait a minute.
When dual wielding, the trap rotates faster but deals damage based on both weapons.
Wait a minute.
Because it's a trap, Blade Trap behaves a little differently to other attack skills by operating independently of your attack speed. This means you'll have some interesting itemization choices to make in focusing more on damage modifiers rather than the typical focus of maximizing attack speed. Summon Reaper creates a single powerful minion that uses fast melee
Minion!
physical attacks which cause bleeding. While the Reaper is active, you can use the skill again to direct the Reaper to a specific location, dealing a powerful attack along its path. The Reaper wants to be your only minion. It reduces the life and damage of your other minions, and will consume them to heal itself and gain damage and speed buffs. When designing this new skill for the Necromancer, we wanted to explore the idea of having a single ultimate minion. While there were ways to somewhat achieve this before, the Reaper is quite different in its abilities and interactions with other minions.
That's going to be
It also feels
insane.
much more active and directly under your control.
That's going to be
One quick
insane.
note though, the Reaper will absolutely eat your animated Guardian if you're not careful.
Yikes.
Forbidden Rite is a powerful new spell that fires an exploding chaos projectile at a targeted area. It also targets a selection of enemies in an area around the player's location and fires projectiles at them too. But be careful, Forbidden Rite also inflicts damage on you when cast. If you can find a clever way to mitigate this harmful downside, you'll have devastating and widespread damage at your fingertips.
That seems very strong. That's a CI build
The
right there.
Eye of Winter is a large projectile that fires out a barrage
my
of cold
God.
projectiles in a spiral formation as it travels.
There it is, boys.
When it reaches its maximum distance or collides with the terrain, it explodes, firing out even more projectiles.
They know
in the
exactly
spiral.
what they're doing.
This type of skill is one we've been wanting to bring to Path of Exile for a long time, and we felt this new collection of skills was the perfect place to showcase it.
I mean,
This Inquisitor is using the new Battle Mage's Cry skill, which taunts nearby
I'm
enemies
sorry,
and
what?
exerts your subsequent attacks, causing them to trigger a linked spell in your next melee hit.
I'm
Here
sorry,
you can
what?
see the player taunting enemies with Battle Mage's Cry and using Consecrated Path to teleport to enemies. The slam is exerted, triggering Firestorm to rain down on those enemies. In order to assist with scaling both attack and spell damage, the
That
buff
might be
this
good.
Warcry provides lets your spell damage apply to your attacks. This property is usually only available on wands and certain unique items. Mana Bond is a somewhat unusual gem in that its source of power relies on your current mana. Upon use, it creates a rune that explodes at a location you're targeting. This explosion can either deal more damage or cover a larger area depending on the state of your mana. The more mana that's missing from your mana pool, the more damage Mana Bond will deal, as it converts a percentage of your missing mana into added lightning damage.
I don't think that's
The
going
more
to get
full
used
your
much.
mana pool is, the more area the explosion will cover. This means that being adept at managing your mana pool becomes highly advantageous. For example, having slightly higher mana while clearing a map provides greater clear speed, but when fighting tougher enemies, having a lower current mana amount is better. Absolution has been designed for Guardians as a spell version of Dominating Blow.
I guess maybe Archmage.
Absolution deals a damaging shockwave in a targeted area. When it kills an enemy, it summons a Sentinel of Absolution, which also deals damage by casting Absolution itself. The Sentinels also periodically cast a larger version of Absolution on the cooldown. While the Sentinels version of Absolution can't summon even more minions, they are a powerful army to fight against. Spectral Helix throws a spectral copy of your melee weapon, which spirals outwards from you, dealing damage to any
Oh
enemies
my
it
god,
passes
it's
through.
fucking...
The design of
Holy
this skill
shit.
achieves what we always wanted Val's Spectral Throw to be. We thought it was a really fun idea for a
They
skill,
put
but
this
because of
in?
the limitations caused by the
Hammertons are back, boys!
It wasn't possible to use Val's Spectral Throw as a primary
Look at that!
skill. Now that Spectral Helix can live up to this purpose, we've reworked Val's Spectral Throw, which we'll reveal closer to release. One of the other issues that Val's Spectral Throw had was that it didn't work very well in indoors areas. However, Spectral Helix improves upon this, as the projectiles that spiral outwards can also bounce off of walls and proceed to hit enemies, rather than simply disappearing upon collision.
That's fucking sick.
Over the last few years, Path of Exile has really suffered from player power creep. As a consequence of trying to make compelling content,
Here we go. Get
each
ready.
expansion we
Get
release either gives players more axes on which to improve their
Get
character,
ready, chat.
more
It's
effective
coming.
skills to use, or ways to craft better and more powerful items. Measuring from closed beta to now, this Expedition expansion is our 30th Path of Exile release. The amount of power creep varies per release, of course, with
Now that's a
systems
weird
like
graph.
Ascendancy classes providing, like
How do you
20,
judge
30,
power?
40% power creep at once? Like with Compound Interest, it would only take 8% more player power per expansion from new items, crafting, character systems, item acquisition opportunities.
Yeah, I guess just like
and new
top
skills for
DPS
player
in the
power to
game.
grow tenfold since the game has been out. And tenfold is roughly what we measure the increase in player power to be. We may nerf the most out-of-hand cases every launch, but we're only reducing them back down to close to the new baseline. The average Path of Exile character gets more and more powerful. While we do occasionally add new endgame challenges that are appropriate for the current power level of top characters, the rest of the game just becomes relatively easier and easier. Some games handle this by just endlessly and exponentially scaling monster life and damage to counteract player power growth. Eventually, the numbers get too large and you need to crunch them all down again. This is a really cheap approach and makes the game feel like a treadmill where the developers are just turning a knob as they hand you new power, keeping you in the same place forever. We don't want to treat Path of Exile like that, and hence our solutions are more complicated. At the same time, one of the issues is that players will always pick the most powerful way of interacting with any game system, even when that's not actually fun to play. This leads to behaviors like Flask Piano, or the way that everyone just picks support gems that basically add pure damage. As game designers, it is our responsibility to make sure that the most powerful behaviors are also the most fun to engage with. With that in mind, the balance changes that we are making in Expedition are far-reaching and are going to affect almost all characters. Our goal is not to just nerf specific builds, but to improve the game, its challenge, and to make sure that people want to pick fun build choices.
Oh boy. Monka S.
Anyone who played Path of Exile during its closed beta 9 years ago can attest to how challenging the campaign was to play through. Early monsters were dangerous and terrifying, able to kill a character in a few seconds of inattention. Players feared going into the ship graveyard cave because of the flicker strike ghosts. They were careful around rowers because a couple of unlucky charges could outright kill them. Trying to kill a Goatman Shaman while he had Molten Shell up was a pretty terrible idea. Nowadays, however, the game is a lot easier. We added level 2 and 4 support gems without increasing the difficulty of the game to compensate at all. Modern League mechanics shower the player in rare items from early levels, and we didn't make the game any harder in response. In fact, it's very interesting to compare the difficulty of League content with that of the base game. For a few years now, we've been shipping difficult leagues where monster life and damage values are a lot higher than the regular monsters that players fight between those League encounters. Players enjoy League content because it's challenging. They also told us they really enjoyed the Path of Exile 2 demo at ExileCon, and it was tuned to be almost punitive in terms of difficulty. One thing we learned from building that demo was that it's okay for some monsters to be able to run 20 to 40% faster than the player. In Path of Exile 1's first act, there isn't a single monster that moves faster than the player's default movement speed. We are rebalancing the campaign to be challenging. So far, we've focused mostly on Act 1, but with each coming expansion, we'll be extending this further. Our plan is that within a year or so, we'll have reviewed or touched every single monster in the game. While this additional challenge probably won't stop our most skilled players easily dominating the campaign or running through it to get to maps quickly, it will mean that players who engage with the content will find a consistent difficulty level between League content and regular content. It's worth noting that the behavioral and balance changes to monsters will definitely affect their map versions. For quite some time, Path of Exile players and developers have been keen for a big rework to its Flask system. In the endgame, Flasks grant really powerful buffs for a number of seconds after use, and these buffs allow the player to kill monsters quickly, filling the flasks up so they can be used as soon as they run out. With 5 such flasks equipped, the correct behavior was to spam the 1 to 5 keys repeatedly to keep all the flasks constantly up without any downsides. This Flask Piano playstyle was popular enough that players were improvising devices to hit all of those keys at once. Spamming the same set of keys repeatedly to get a powerful set of buffs that rival the power you get from your entire set of equipped items is not a fun game mechanic. It's unbalanced and certainly isn't nice on your wrist. It prevents us from balancing the game well for players who aren't smashing their keyboard constantly and seriously restricts the design space we can use on flasks. In addition, certain unique flasks
completely Do you think they're just going to put Flask macro in game?
Raw damage output. It was pretty clear to us that Path of Exile will be a lot better if we did some serious work on flasks to make sure that their incentives were aligned with fun rather than with spamming blindly. Most utility flasks and unique flasks have been rebalanced. Expect a lot less permanent power from flasks. Flasks that provide raw defense or raw power are the ones with the biggest nerfs. Some flasks have been selectively buffed a bit if they were underpowered or less popular. In the Expedition expansion, there are now 3 ways that you can use flasks. You can either continue to use the rebalanced ones the traditional way, or you can apply one of the 2 new types of currency items to your flasks. The Instilling Orb and Enkindling Orb drop as part of the regular drop pool from regular monsters and chests. The Instilling Orb will cause a flask to be used automatically upon a specific condition being met.
Called it.
For example, when its charges become full or when you become affected by Ignite. This means that in the cases where you would previously want to time a specific flask usage, you can now rely on it happening automatically, with the only trade-off being that it may consume charges that you otherwise wouldn't intend it to. There are a variety of different conditions, and a random one is enchanted onto your flask, overwriting the others each time you use an Instilling Orb on it.
How How hard will it be
The
to get that
Enkindling
shit, though?
Orb prevents utility flasks from gaining charges while active, but provides a big boost to their effect, duration, or various ways they interact with their charges. There are various different types of boosts, so you can use more orbs to reroll for the one that you want. When a flask removes a curse, it no longer applies a period of immunity to curses. Flasks that remove ailments now only provide a period of immunity to that ailment if they actually removed it. So if you get ignited, use a dowsing flask to remove the ignite and to gain immunity for a while. You can't spam the flask before you're ignited to be permanently immune.
Oh my god.
If you want permanent mitigation of ailments, there are other options for your build. Note that we have rebalanced ailment mitigation in general, so there aren't a few options that completely outclass the rest. Monster density in Path of Exile gets a lot higher as you play through the game.
I don't know if
When we
that's
initially balanced
good.
Flask charge generation a decade ago,
Dude, that-
we did not
that looks
anticipate the
insane.
levels
I'm gonna
of
have to
monster
play
density
that.
we would reach by 2021. Monsters in Acts 6 through 10 now generate fewer Flask charges, and monsters in maps generate even fewer still. So now there's a lot more strategy involved with Flask use. Flasks don't gain as many charges, so are a little harder to constantly spam, and aren't designed to provide such a powerful slew of permanent buffs. But you can control which provide larger than normal effects and which are triggered automatically as part of your build. We have reworked existing flasks such as Basalt and Aquamarine
Oh,
flasks
gold
and have
flask.
introduced new Corundum and Gold flasks.
Interesting.
For a while now, we have been concerned with a power gap between support gems. There are gems that grant huge multiplicative damage bonuses, and there are gems that do a bunch of stuff you don't really care about. When you're building a character, by far the correct choice is just to stack on all the multiplicative damage bonuses and ignore all the interesting utility support gems because their opportunity cost is just too high. We are reducing the damage bonuses on the support gems that are clearly just about huge damage boosts and trying to give them impactful and appropriate downsides. For example, the Controlled Destruction
Holy
support
shit.
gem now penalizes critical strikes multiplicatively. Overall, this works out to a total of somewhere around 20%, potentially as high as 40% damage reduction for a character using a fully 6-linked skill with entirely damaged support gems. There's much less impact for characters that use utility support gems or those who didn't have a 6-link setup. This achieves two goals for us. Firstly, the gap between good and bad support gems has been narrowed, creating more interesting build opportunities. Secondly, player damage output in the endgame is reduced, which is a goal for this balance pass. As I mentioned, we want to iteratively restore challenge to Path of Exile. It's worth clarifying that we haven't buffed unused utility support gems as part of this balance pass. It's fully intentional that it's a reduction of power for the most damaging ones. When we're designing skills for Path of Exile, the mana cost of the skill is a mechanism to allow us to have larger impactful effects. Bigger skills should cost more mana to cast. Unfortunately, this entire mechanism is currently bypassed by triggering skills as this skips their mana cost.
Oh boy.
This basically means that we can't design really powerful spells. In 3.15, triggering skills through support gems will require paying their mana cost. In fact, sometimes it now costs more than casting the gem by hand. Thankfully though, this isn't very hard with well-constructed characters. Certain support gems that were originally disabled from supporting triggered skills, like Arcane Surge, can now be used to support them. Builds that use triggered skills are some of the most interesting characters in Path of Exile, and they're often the best representation of the craziness that our character customization system allows.
They weren't
We're
fucking
confident
around.
that they are just as powerful as before, but we now have more interesting design space to explore with future skills. Now let's talk about movement skills. As you know, most interaction with monster behavior is essentially bypassed if you're using an
What are
extremely
you
effective
doing,
movement skill.
Chris?
This is okay if you're specialized
What are
deeply
you
into
doing?
customizing that skill, but it's currently the default state for any character if you use Flame Dash, Smoke Mine, or Dash without any further investment. These skills have been rebalanced to be more in line with other movement skills. These are not huge numeric nerfs, but do mean that there is scope for improving the performance of the skills by specializing around them. There are many other balance changes in 3.15, which you can read about in the Balance Manifesto and patch notes next week. To be honest, there are a lot of nerfs here. We completely understand that this level of change will make some people nervous, but it's time we start actively combating power creep and fixing game systems that haven't been working the way we intended them to. I think that the metagame of Expedition is going to be fascinating. The reduction of overall player power, combined with all of the opportunities from the new skills and Flask system changes, should create entirely new sets of builds that we haven't previously seen. You guys are always surprising us with what you do, and we can't wait to see what you come up with here. So back in early 2018, there was a trend where every online game was releasing a Battle Royale mode and getting a lot of good press in the process. We had a running joke in the office that our fast development speed meant that we could probably add a Battle Royale mode to Path of Exile in 1 day of development. As April Fool's Day approached, we tried to do exactly that. We pulled a few developers together and asked them to spend no more than 1 workday each on their contributions to this new mode. On April 1st, 2018, we launched Path of Exile Royale.
Goldran! Yeah, buddy!
It was a quick and dirty job, so we only left the game mode turned on for a couple of days. It went pretty well considering it had no custom balance whatsoever.
Oh my god, I'm getting destroyed!
After April 1st, we turned the mode off and forgot all about it. But the community did not forget. In fact, they've been quite keen to remember it constantly and to urge us to bring it back. But that wouldn't be easy, as to actually make it a decent experience would require a lot of custom balance, playtesting, and feature implementation work. A few months ago, we decided to do exactly that. Path of Exile Royale will return today. In fact, immediately after the QA section of this livestream. We're going to run it for the weekend as a test, and then turn it on
There's
every weekend for a
47
while,
minutes
starting
left.
the week after Expedition's launch. We'll patch it between weekends with balance tweaks, and if it's popular over the long term, new features.
Holy
We
shit.
have no idea what the long-term viability of this game mode is going to be like, so we'll run it for this league and then assess where things stand. Our initial version of Royale from 2018 used Path of Exile's default passive skill tree, which didn't have interesting options for characters that rarely got to level 10. It also used all of our skill gems and unique items as is, where many of the interesting ones were way too high level for these super low level characters to ever find. We've made a completely new Royale-specific passive skill tree that has everything you need to quickly adapt your character for high-speed PvP combat. It features approximately 90
it's only
new
got
custom
70
levelable
choices.
passives, a special new left-aligned window so you can stay aware of your surroundings while allocating skills, and you gain 2 passive skill points per level. You're also able to allocate passive skills from any of the tree's starting locations, regardless of which character class you picked.
Huh.
We have created low-level versions of around 50 iconic skill gems, 20 support gems, and over 70 unique items. These Royalified items are appropriate for low-level play and include quite a few things that are usually only available at substantially higher character levels in the core game. The whole island has been improved. We've made the terrain more varied and interesting so that the fights feel different depending on where they take place. You'll encounter flask troves, which provide charges for your flasks. These troves periodically replenish themselves, so expect a lot of combat to occur around them. There are many other small improvements you'll notice when you play Royale, such as an improved spectator mode, improved leaderboard, and ability to pillage items from players through a special interface rather than having them clutter the ground. You don't need to delete and remake your character for each game, as you could just reuse
Thank
your
God.
old one, which is automatically reset to level 1.
Thank God.
Your prize for coming first on a Royale event is this new Roa Dinner hideout decoration. It's a bit like a Challenge League totem as it grows more impressive as you win more events.
Damn.
Royale is available to play today, as soon as our Q&A session concludes in about 45 minutes. So patch your Path of Exile client, and when we're done with the Q&A, log in and click to join the Royale event at the bottom right of the screen. For more detailed information on how the mode works, check out the news post we just made on pathofexile.com. We'll be running the event from today over the weekend. If you don't get a chance to play Royale over the next few days,
I might
we'll run
check
it
this
again
out
every
tomorrow,
weekend
chap.
other than Expedition's launch weekend for the next few months. Please check it out and let us know your feedback. Keep an eye on our news over the next week as we reveal the finer details of what's coming in Expedition, including the full patch notes on Tuesday, US time. We'll move on to the Q&A shortly to answer your burning questions, but first, let's have a look at the new supporter packs that are available right now to celebrate the launch of Expedition and help fund ongoing development of Path of Exile.
Dude, this is
Path
a
of Exile
crazy
2, and
league.
special modes like Royale.
Like,
The Soulkeeper and Aesir supporter packs come
no
with masses
joke,
of points
this
to spend in the
this is
store.
a big
social
deal.
frames, forum titles, and badges, a download of the digital soundtrack.
They're doing a
and
lot
course,
of shit.
exclusive cosmetic microtransactions
that
like
fucking
armor sets and
portal
weapon
looks
skins.
insane.
The Soulkeeper series comes with an exclusive pet, and the Aesir series an exclusive set of wings. On top of the traditional small and medium
But you
sized
fixed your
supporter
damn
packs that
engine?
are
I think they
consistent
just
with ones
patched
we've
the
released
engine,
in the
didn't they?
past, we're also adding an optional new third tier for each series. This new tier includes an exclusive apparition portal effect and a slightly better ratio of points per dollar spent. The introduction of these new packs should give you more options for what combination of each pack series you purchase.
Wait, a new tier?
Like always, it's possible to upgrade between pack tiers within each series.
What?
Thank you so much for your support. Purchases of these supporter packs are the only thing that fund the ongoing development of Path of Exile, as well as expansions like Expedition and Path of Exile Royale. The reveals we showed you today are already live on YouTube for you to link to your friends in case they missed the live stream. Please do so. We'd love to have as many of you as possible joining our expedition next week.
How much?
It's time for the Q&A. If you have any questions from what
How
we've
much
shown
are
you
the
today,
tiers,
please
Chad?
get
I mean,
them
I'm
ready
not-
because we're about to be
what-
joined by Ziggy
what are
D
you
as
gonna
we
cost,
answer your
you know?
questions from Twitch chat.
What are we talking about here?
Royale.
What are we thinking? $90? Am I skipping the QA? Fuck no. We're watching the QA. We're going 42 minutes, chat. First off, make sure you use your Prime Gaming and $5 subs here on the channel because I need to make sure we get all those supporter packs. Okay, obviously, thank you. And secondly, that's a lot of crazy changes to PoE. You know? And I kind of feel like we say that literally every league, like, oh my god, dude, it's so insane, bro. They put this item in the game and it's fucking crazy. It's so fucking sick. Oh my fucking god. But this one's literally them just saying we're nerfing everything. And we're hoping to completely fuck the meta. So let's hope we don't fuck this up too bad and everyone still enjoys it. That's kind of what I got from that. Also, Boxa, thanks for that 5 gifted subs. Ecthroid, it's good to see you. Golden Steve, as last Dr. Brody's, appreciate that. Yeah, I couldn't talk about the Battle Royale thing. Yeah, like, I think let me open up the Reddit here real quick. Let's see what Reddit has to say. All right, reddit.com/r/Path of Exile. Jesus. I closed it so fast. There was just, did you hear it? Jeez, good Lord.
Good morning from Australia and New Zealand exiles. I'm Ziggy D and I'm joined here with none other than the Chris Wilson. Good morning, Chris. How's it going?
Hey, things are going good.
That was a lot. That was pretty spicy set of reveals there. And
Yeah, we've been apprehensive about that one.
yeah, I imagine there might be a little bit of
This looks live.
Nerves going into some of the nerfy side of things.
Well, no, there's no way this is live. They have a fucking count. JP, you're an idiot.
Some pretty
Stop
big
talking.
changes here with flasks and general balance and stuff like that. That I imagine a little.
I don't think it's live. There's a literal countdown,
a little
chat.
bit nervous.
There's no way.
Yeah, we're pretty confident in the changes, though. Some of them have been a long time coming, and it's often the case that we'll have something we want to do in a given league and then push it both because it's hard to rip the bandit off and make nerfs, and also because the more we make at the same time, the better we can get the balance by balancing around them simultaneously.
Yeah. We'll get into the nerfs and difficulty changes and flasks and things like that a little bit later. But I wanted to start off with some questions about Expedition League, the new league that's been revealed. My first question is, what sort of failure states do these expeditions have? Like, if you die during the explosive excavation process, does it fail, or can you come straight back into it?
It's pretty permissive. You can come back in, basically. There's no timers and no automatic failure. Essentially, as long as you've got enough portals to get to the area, then it's easy to come back and resume, whether you're placing explosives or doing the combat part of it. If you're playing one of the expeditions that's accessed through a logbook, then it's got 6 portals. Like
I don't even know if the league mechanic's going to be good.
Completed those, you can come right back.
I imagine with a different power level for people to get used to, that'll be helpful.
Yes.
The fact that there's not like a hard failure state, lose things a la heist or something like that in this situation. Are the logbooks the mappy system for this endgame only, or are they available sooner?
They're available sooner. They kick in, I think, Act 3 onwards, so you'll start to get them relatively soon.
So that'll give me another thing that'll make it take a lot more time to get to end game as I get
You
distracted.
can make it a bit like the temples of Exile, of course, but they're fully tradable. So if you don't want to play them and just want to rush to maps, you can always trade them for some currency.
You also added geared gambles. I'm just gonna say, I mean, you touched on it with the 20-year nostalgia.
It's true.
That's awesome. That's not a question though. Are there any specific like new uniques or items that we can only get through the unidentified gambling with Gwenin or the other vendors, I suppose?
So we intentionally didn't put any items exclusively in those windows. We didn't want it so that players absolutely have to engage with those systems to get those items. But you can get some quite interesting stuff. Like if you're lucky, for example, while gambling for an item, you can get influenced items, for example. It's not just vanilla rares. There's some fun treasures hidden away there.
Any other things like from other leagues, like temple modifiers or anything like that? Or are you kind of sticking with the new line of thinking of keeping those things to their respective leagues?
We are trying to keep rewards specific for the content that generates them, but there's some interesting surprises that people will discover when they're doing their gambles.
The second time he says that, move on.
Excited about the haggling and the geek gambling. Now you mentioned immunity to physical damage, and I must admit I cringed a little bit because I generally dislike immunities. So I've got questions about that. As immunities effectively hard shut down specific builds, will these be easy to avoid?
You can choose where you place the explosives, and so you just absolutely don't need to go anywhere near those remnants if you'd rather go somewhere else. And we prefer to have really hard modifiers like this, because either immunity to physical is kind of going to prevent you doing the encounter, or it's going to not affect you at all, and it's entirely upside to tag that one. And so because of this, there's interesting placement choices you'll have to make. It's never going to be the case that it's immunity to physical all around you and the entire expedition is a waste of time. It's relatively rare to get each one of these hard modifiers there, but it'll mean that depending on your build, you're going to completely change the strategy of how you place the explosives. And it's worth noting that the remnants really do ramp up the difficulty quite a bit. Like players will see that they provide benefits and think, sweet, I'll just tag all of them. And you should only do that if you've really read what they do and actually feel you have a character capable of doing that content, which will be slightly harder to achieve in this league compared to previous ones.
It sounds like you'll know if you hit the wrong one. You kind of touched on my next question there a little bit, but why use something like immunities then if it's effectively completely avoid or just do it because it's a free pass?
Because if it doesn't have a large impact in either direction on your character, then it doesn't really matter which one you want to hit. And we want to avoid the situation where every remnant averages out to it's a bit harder and gives you a bit more items. We're making it so that, it actually has an impact on your character. Just like how you care if a map you're running as temp chains or not. People actually do read maps before running them, and that's a good thing.
Some people.
Yeah. Concerning. They'll have to now.
Good stuff. We had a very good co-op league last league. Just want to say that Ultimate was fantastic for co-op. How does this one work in co-op?
I believe that only the map instance owner can actually place the explosives, but everything else is cooperative. You can share the drops and share the fighting, and so it's really good to bring a team for it, especially with the new difficulty. It is basically the case that nowadays when we're designing leagues, we're not going to allow ourselves to release something that works terribly in multiplayer. Like, it's a mistake we've made in the past. And part of the process now is asking the question, how does this work with parties? To the point where we have some pretty cool league ideas. They get put back on the drawing board because they really aren't party compatible.
That's really good to hear. I've very much enjoyed the new trend towards making things a lot more co-op handy. Does the currency stuff kind of like spread out between the players? Like both people get access to the trade windows, or only if it's their map, or how does that work?
My understanding, I'm just going to check this. Hey guys, all the players can access the vendors, right? Yeah, it's all good.
Okay, it's all good. It's all good. Nice.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm winning.
Yeah. If it's not the case, they'll fix it.
Good stuff. I feel like I'm winning the Q&A if I ask you a question. You have to look off to the side to ask Jonathan or whoever's sitting next to you. I have people in the background.
Today's crowd is Mark and Rory.
Hi, Mark and Rory. Thanks, guys. Next up, I want to ask you about some of the new skills. Normally, I leave the skill stuff a bit because technical information is better read when you reveal the gems a little bit closer to release. But this time you have 19 skill gems, one for each ascendancy class, it looked like, and that's pretty huge, and some of these are also very interesting. So let's just rattle off some of these skills. Rage Vortex, it's limited to one active at a time, and it looks pretty cool. But does this take attack speed into consideration then, since you can only have one of them?
Yeah, that's right. If you have increased attack speed, it affects the speed that your vortex attacks. You can just imagine it like a detached copy of yourself cycloning, basically, right? Like it spins off a copy of you doing a
That sounds
cyclone.
kind of great.
And so this means that if you have increased attack speed or various other bits and pieces, it
That
will be acting like
Earthbreaker
you would
support
do a
seems
cyclone
insane,
yourself.
by the way.
Can you ramp that in? I saw some of the concerns in chat were like that clear speed looked like it might be an issue with it. Can you ramp that in terms of AoE a fair bit? Maybe with like melee range or something like that?
Yeah, here's the thing, guys. When we're filming this footage, we have two choices. We can film the low-level footage, or we can film nuts endgame stuff. And so the team, being how they are, made nuts endgame stuff. We're talking pimped out characters, like as far as you can go, right? Like mirror-worthy gear, and they had these builds that cleared the screen in seconds, and the Rage Vortex was, the size of Pluto. It was just ridiculous, right? And so we filmed a bunch of footage, and it looked really powerful. The problem is if we stick that as the first thing you see of the skill, you're going to assume, cool, that's without support gems. I'm going to ramp this up a lot. And so we toned it really far down for a lot of the footage you're seeing here is intentionally completely unsupported versions of the skills. And you can see the difference between the vanilla one with almost monster AI off, really simple stuff, versus the higher level stuff. And we didn't go too crazy on the high level stuff. So yes, you can take these skills and really go a bit further than we showed with them.
Bone Shatter
It's
looks
always
like
up to the
shit.
players to
Bone
min-max these ones.
Shitter.
I love when you mentioned Pluto. 'Cause
More
I
like
knew
it.
the space nerds were
Got
going to come
'em.
out in chat and be like, Pluto's actually small. Guys, it's a planetary body or an asteroid body, even if it's not a planet.
And
it's still a
for
lot
clarity,
bigger.
That's still a large amount of area of effect for a skill, right?
All right, maybe it's not technically planet
But
size.
actually,
Come on. Okay. So with Bone Shatter, the new stun favorite, is there a limit to the trauma stacks, or is the limit just killing yourself?
You will be dead long before you work out what the limit is.
Challenge
Like a
accepted.
challenge. There's some big, thick armor jugs out there that are going to take that one up, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think the trauma stacks drop off when they expire as well, so you have to be able to attack quite quickly to find out if there's a limit.
Nice. Focus Ballista seems to allow you to greatly enhance your single target by having effectively two six-links going at the same time, damaging the same target. Will this just be like the new go-to for boss killing setups then?
Well, you already could have a second six link for your totems that you were using, essentially, like an existing ballista. This is a bit stronger damage-wise, of course, because it's shooting faster. But one important note here is it's going to stop shooting when you're evading the boss abilities, whereas an existing totem would have just kept plucking away at the boss. So there's pros and cons here. But yeah, if you have the ability to shoot uninterrupted at the boss, then this is the way to ramp that damage up.
I was pretty excited about the reveal of a grenade flask throwing skill. So does explosive concoction simply consume charges from Ruby, Sapphire, and Topaz flasks?
The
to
head
add more
looks
elemental
insane
damage?
too.
Or are there some other impacts based on the actual flasks you have equipped?
So by default, it does fire damage, and if you have those special flasks equipped, it will consume some charges to add damage if you're using the lightning and cold ones. For the ruby flasks, it doesn't add additional damage, it increases the ignite chance, and so you can really ramp up your ignite build that way. It already does plenty of fire damage as it is, and this means that you'll need to consider how you're rolling your flasks, of course. You may want to roll so you've got more charges available, especially if you plan to actually use those flasks to stay alive. And so this build plays pretty differently to other ones.
Is there any way to scale the flask effect usages of the skill?
That's a good question. How would you answer that?
No, it doesn't. You don't change it based on just how much.
Yeah, the skill itself, you don't change how much it's consuming from the flasks, but of course, because it consumes quite a lot as you're using it, you want to make sure you have ample access to charges, whether they come from the flask being better rolled or whether they come from kill speed.
Okay, we got a lot of. It's a pretty interesting one, especially because it's no weapons equipped. Can you have a shield equipped with that, or?
Yeah, I believe so, as long as you're unarmed.
Okay. The Reaper skill, the new summoning skill, looks extremely cool, but it's designed to be more of a single minion build, which you talked about a bit. How is that able to compete with the insane area coverage that you get with minion swarm setups?
Basically, just damage and the ability to afflict bleed and control it better. It certainly has more safety issues for your character if you only have a limited number of minions, but of course, in return, you get to clear faster potentially. It's worth noticing that you do want to have a small swarm so that you can feed. People, please not Discord call me things. It's worth noting you definitely want to have a small swarm so that you can feed the Reaper. She definitely likes to devour guys when she's low on life, and so yeah, it's quite important to have a few other minions around.
It seems like the sort of thing where you can have a bit of an active summon.
This might be live.
In addition to having that minion out all the time, and then maybe supplement with that. Like, I imagine if it doesn't consume super quickly,
That was me calling
you
Chris,
could
yeah.
still have some minions out on the field doing stuff as well as getting consumed.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you can have
Me,
minions
Phil,
that
and
fine,
Chris
they're
have
just
a
weaker than
poker
normal,
game
right? So you just shouldn't
that
go all in
happens
on those
every
minions.
Friday.
She'll grab them from time to time whenever she wants buffs, but if she's low on life, it's a lot more aggressive in terms of how quickly she wants to feed.
Chad was asking if they consume golems, but I'm pretty sure that's a yes because it even consumes your Animate Guardian, as we saw in the video.
It's
Nice.
Thursday. I know. I was
I like
seeing if
that.
he was going to attend this week.
So Eye of Winter is a skill that has been a long time coming, I think. Where there's some specific challenges in designing and balancing the skill.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because the base version of this that we were inspired by is from a game that doesn't support gems, and so we had to be very careful when designing the Path
What's
of
the name of
Exile
that
version
game,
to
Chris?
make sure that it works well when you do crazy stuff, right? And the obvious question is what happens with multiple projectiles, and the answer here is that the final blast of shards is the one that gets the additional projectiles. That can shotgun, right? So that's quite an interesting choice we had to make, because you have the question of shooting the eye into the boss and having a lot of those shards hit the boss at the same time is very damaging, and that's one of the really iconic ways of using this type of skill, the ability to aim that correctly. Now, the true degeneracy comes from traps, mines, totems, unleash, all that kind of stuff, right? Like you can have some eyes on the screen. Let's just say we designed this one for performance.
Okay. Mana
true
Bond,
degeneracy.
seems to mess around with the concept of mana casters. Does the bonus damage from the missing mana scale up as your maximum mana increases, or is it based on the percentage of missing mana instead? So does
It cares
scale the
about
same way?
it cares about the number of points of missing mana. So you want your mana pool to be as big as possible, and then you want to have emptied it if you're caring about damage there. So for the area of effect increase, it cares about percentage of missing, and for actual damage increase, it cares about numeric mana missing.
Okay, so the damage scaling still fits into the kind of meta of mana casters that exists currently, even though it kind of flips it on its head a little bit conceptually. Let's move on to difficulty, the big stuff. What can we expect from behavioral and balance changes, were the specific terminology mentioned there, to monsters in the campaign?
There's a lot of stuff here, and it's kind of what happens if you go through and redo stuff, in 2021 that you set up a long time ago. Like, you have to remember, when we first set up Path of Exile's early acts, I mean, it's had some maintenance since then, but we were children, essentially, making our first game, right? Like, we were in our early 20s, have never done one of these before, right? So it took some actual adult supervision now for people, like Mark and Rory and stuff who know what they're doing to go through and make that content pretty good. So basically, the monsters have more life, they move faster, they on average deal more damage per second. There's lots of aesthetic changes, a bit of modern, let's make this stuff, not necessarily redo the art, but in terms of making skills and stuff feel a lot better.
Hardcore is going to be fun that first day.
And the AI has been redone for a lot of monsters in terms of how intelligent, where they use skills. There's even some leading behavior where I think Hellrake will shoot his glacial cascades out in front of where you're running to, trying to tag you, which is terrifying when it happens to you and makes, you really wonder what's happening there.
Dang.
The monsters have a lot less aggro range early on. It's less a matter of aggroing the entire screen when you run around. So there are improvements here to make the early game actually appropriately simple in some ways, despite being deadly. We had a look at monster density in the first act. We actually found that the second half of Act 1 had much lower monster density than the first half, so we fixed that. We've added some new monster types to Act 1, specifically in the prison and Merveil's caves, so it does feel pretty different, and we kind of have a thing at the moment at the office where we'll kind of dare team members to just play through Act 1, I'll watch you, and it's fascinating to see the results. And so, they're working through the other acts
what
as
does
fast
that
as
mean?
possible so that we don't get too much of a jump between the two types of content. But basically, the intention is that the campaign is actually a fun experience to play through. And for players concerned that doesn't add to their mapping experience, you can probably still use your advanced PoE skills to get to maps quickly. It's not that much of a speed bump for the game to have some challenge along the way. You'll still get there in hours. It's fine. And secondly, these changes do affect maps a little bit. The monsters will start to become more intelligent, and a year later, maps will be quite a lot more fun to play because all the monsters will do intelligent stuff.
I quite like that you mentioned the reduced aggro range as the thing, because that sounds like a trend towards fighting fewer but more interesting and tougher enemies, which is something that I've wanted to see for a long time. So is that a trend that we can expect to continue?
We want there to be enough enemies that it does feel like you're fighting packs, of course, rather than just single super intelligent guys. But at the same time, there's no need to spam monsters if we don't need to, right? Like it affects performance, it affects a number of factors. So we want the fights to be about the right size. And we haven't gone through and reduced monster density and maps here. It's just making sure it's appropriate for the campaign.
He did say a year
It
from
leads
now.
into the idea
Part of me wonders
that I
if
often talk about on stream, which is difficulty
never mind.
via like just a lot of spammy stuff happening all at once, or difficulty that you can actually read and engage with. Yeah, Ultimatum versus say the boss fight of Ultimatum.
Right. And this is something that we worked very hard on with Expeditions Combat, because we looked back at Ultimatum and just said, like, this is just throwing monsters at the screen, right? Like, this is a case where you kind of close your eyes, spam your clicks, and hope that you survive. Whereas with Expedition, we want it so that the monsters, you're purposely choosing the hard monsters, you know, a bit like Legion, for example, and then you're actually able to interact with them in combat with telegraphed attacks and interesting stuff going on. And so we think we've done a much better job with combat in this league. In fact, while in the video I explained that I liked the NPC mechanics with the merchant trading and stuff, honestly, the actual moment-to-moment combat of playing the Expeditions is a breath of fresh air compared to
it's a breath of fresh air.
Yeah. What should we expect in terms of other nerfs that you haven't mentioned in the video? Is there anything else?
I think that it's better to wait for the manifesto that we're going to be posting about that stuff. We didn't hold back on the usual nerfs that we do. There are buffs as well. It's just the usual balance pass. But one thing to bear in mind is because there are so many core changes to Path of Exile systems here, we have been relatively liberal with other nerfs that we've needed to make. Like, this is the right time because the metagame is going to be different. Normally in a Path of Exile league, players will say, okay, I know all the good builds. The question is whether these new bleeding skills are the best build or not. If they are the best build, I'm playing it. If they're not the best build, I'm playing the one that I already like. And it's pretty understandable. Here, you don't know what the best builds are. We've nerfed the best builds. We've buffed the non-best builds. We've changed how flasks work in a very large way. The game plays differently. Like, you can't walk into this expansion knowing what's going to be amazing. And that's going to be quite an interesting process of discovery. So the number of viable builds, both due to the uncertainty and due to the fact that they're actually more viable builds
I'm going to play Toxic Rain, and it better be good.
So when you see the manifesto,
Mr. Wilson,
we'll do our best to explain the reasoning behind the nerfs. We don't want to do it arbitrarily. Like, we understand that nerfing the game will turn some players off, and it's generally seen as a negative thing. We would only do this if we felt that it was the right thing for Path of Exile, both in the future and immediately.
That's a good lead into asking about, like, so recent leagues have been pretty nerf heavy in general, with like fewer buffs to underused skills and builds. And while the goal is pretty clearly, as you stated in the video, to start reining in power creep and up the challenge of PoE, can we also expect some love for some of the older things for people to get excited about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We've definitely selected old skills that need some work and buffed them. You know, we've got a growing list of those internally, and as the team discover more that are easy for us to numerically change, we do that. And I'm careful not to overpromise here, because in the past we threw numbers around of number of skills that were buffed, and then someone looks at a skill kind of sideways and says, that's not really a buff. So I'm not going to name any numbers, but yeah, there's a bunch of skills that we've been working on, and you know, it's going to continue, right? If we see stuff that's below the curve, we will make sure to adjust it. Now, one thing that's important to bear in mind here is, like, when we're looking at builds that have been popular recently, we're seeing like Ice Spear, Spark, Burning Arrow turning up just out of nowhere because people find clever ways to use them. And those are not skills that we said, oh yeah, no one's using Burning Arrow, let's add 30% more damage or anything. This is a case of players saying, oh, here's a cool combo, and then it starts to take off. And so there are a lot of sleeper skills there that probably don't need buffs, that are just waiting for the right moment to be found. Now, of course, there are also ones that do need buffs, and we've been careful to buff those ones.
How do you find managing the community reaction to dealing with power creep like this?
It's difficult to communicate this stuff, because everyone who's watching this can hear the explanation and it makes sense, but I don't expect all the players to watch this. It's hard to actually have someone like read the patch notes, see a change to their favorite skill that they know and love, and get excited to play that particular release, because like it's what the safe option in the back of the mind is to play the thing, and we've just told them you're going to make 10% slower progress playing that thing, which is fun in the context of a more balanced game where now you're getting a better ratio of rewards per time and various other bits and pieces. But it is difficult to communicate this, and it's so tempting to just play for player expectations and throw entirely buffs around and never touch anything nerf-wise. You know, we don't have to come into work and nerf stuff. If we wanted to just be popular and have record player numbers, we would just buff, 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 and then the game would die relatively quickly because there's no actual challenge left. We want to be the action RPG that despite having been out for a decade, still maintains some degree of a level playing field, and that requires occasionally we have to rip the band-aid off here. Now, it's been tempting to leave all of this for Path of Exile 2 launch day, right? Like, you rock up to Path of Exile 2, and the game is entirely different. And that jeopardizes the launch day to some extent. We can find out now how these things actually play. We can find out now what the reaction is going to be, and make sure to have it in an appropriate place by PoE2 launch day. And so this means, like, players, if you play this, and you actually, like, 2 weeks into it, hate what we've done, post some constructive feedback, explain why you found other behavior more fun, explain what you'd like to see in the future, and we will read it. We do have our own vision for what we're doing here, but at the same time, it's a game we're making for you guys to enjoy, and we believe that a greater degree of skill variety being used, and also some uncertainty at league launch
That's the way to handle it.
builds are actually enjoyable things, because we see people complain constantly, including our own staff, that they already know how the league is going to go because they know what build they're going to play. They kind of understand how it's going to play out. And we want to create some mystery there. We want it so people are actually pushing to find the best builds.
That's a good time to ask, like, do you have a specific vision for difficulty that you'd like the game to reach? I know in the past it was mentioned that ideally the game would have periods of casual gameplay with those spikes in difficulty. Is that still the vision, or has it kind of changed over time?
Yeah, that is the vision. We do want it so you can play relatively safely and then have spikes of difficulty occasionally. And this is what you'll see when playing league content that we've
I wonder
been
if
releasing
Ziggy's
for the
going to
last
ask
few
him
weeks.
about
That content
sponsored
is fun when you're playing
streams
through the
and
various encounters. The problem is that the
stuff like
campaign
that.
and kind of map content between the leagues can get so much easier. It's just so far under the curve. Like, we're having situations where when we're balancing the monsters for like Ritual or Delirium or something, they've got like triple the hit points of regular game monsters. We're sitting there doing correct balance for the new stuff, and the old stuff was languishing with incorrect balance. And that's why we've been working to raise it back up again, and also to make sure there's more consistent rewards and so on. So it's worthwhile playing both types of content.
There's a couple questions I have here that have been picked up from chat that kind of touch on the same area of topic, which is how do you feel this impacts like a player who maybe doesn't play as much Path of Exile, but has in the past, due to power creep, been able to access more content, been able to do Shaper and Elder, and have enjoyed that experience as a result? You're making the game a lot harder overall in general. How do you feel like it affects those players, and how do you want it to affect those players?
Well, there's a couple of things here. The first one is that if you wait a week, read what the best build guide is, or watch your favorite YouTuber who's worked out how to play the game properly and do what that person did, you can probably still get similar results, right? Like, we're not talking about big nerfs here. This isn't the big difficulty change. There could be a big difficulty change in the future. This is the first step down that path to see how it's received and how much more fun it is and so on. We're hoping the response is that it is actually more fun. So it's still going to be possible for casual players
to get your questions ready, but completely
and then the second
chat.
thing is, philosophically, should there be content?
He literally just said he was pulling questions from chat.
Right? I'm not saying creating content
or
for
this
the 1%,
question came from chat.
Content for the 15%. There are arguments that there should be content that the casual player just can't see without significant time investment. Now, of course, it sucks if that's something they were seeing without time investment before, and now you've taken it away from them. But over time, as we maintain the difficulty in a good place, any new expansion content we add, like at the next endgame expansion, for example, maybe that will be difficult enough that the casual players may not get to see that without a bunch of work.
Backing onto that question, there's been like content you've added that has been tuned towards the power creep. So like new content, difficult content, higher endgame bosses, league content, and stuff like that, that is designed for the level of power we had previously. Is some of that stuff going to be tuned to the new?
We are making sure it's in a good place balance-wise. A lot of it's to do with how late into the league people see it, right? Like, let's say the league's out for 3 months. We're not saying it should take 90 days of grinding to get to some of the content, right? That means people have to just sit at their computer for the entire 3 months without a job, which is unreasonable. But at the same time, is it okay that people are killing the absolute end bosses within days of the league coming out, right? Like that. It feels it could take a little bit longer. Now, at the moment, we're not just extending that arbitrarily. Like, we're trying to make actual reasonable balance changes to the game rather than just saying, oh, this grind is twice as long because we want people playing longer. That's a bit of a cheap shot there, but we are looking at ways that we can make sure that there's a lot more progression before you reach the end of the game and run out of stuff to do.
Chat says yes, it's fine that people reach those bosses in the first few days, but I think that kind of like expands the question out to is that more about like the Tai killer killing the boss in the first few days, or is it more about like the larger bulk of players killing bosses in the first few days? Where are you aiming there?
And people are living vicariously through the top streamers and stuff. It is a question of whether or not you want your favorite good streamer to take a bit of time, whether you want to race, if you see what I mean. Like
He's
these
not
these
talking
events
about me,
to,
chat.
to kill top bosses and so on. Is that more fun if it takes a
I'm the
little bit longer?
cash.
And
Okay.
we haven't extended this particularly large amount. It's more of a philosophical question here, but we are trying to experiment with this in ways that don't just punitively say to players, hey, that thing you used to do, it's now just going to take longer because we feel about it. There are no experience nerfs, for example, in this expansion, even though we desperately want the race to 100 to take what it used to do. That's not a change we're making, without careful consideration and some upside to it.
This is all kind of ramping towards having less of the overt jump to Path of Exile 2's gameplay. How do you what happens if it feels like it's going in the wrong direction as you get towards Path of Exile 2? How much room is there to kind of shift things in a different direction, do you think?
This is why we're doing it now, right? Path of Exile 2 is at least a number of leagues away, and if we continue this work rather than just kind of sweeping it under the rug for later, which is what we were doing before to some extent, if we actually proactively start this now, we can get the feedback and data that we need to make sure it's in a good place, because we've been careful with Path of Exile 2. Every system change we've made is an improvement on PoE 1, and the content is great, right? There is no doubt that Path of Exile 2 is going to be successful. The scary thing is where it comes balance-wise, because we don't want to launch it with the crazy tier of Path of Exile balance that the game has evolved to with power creep. And so this is our strategy of carefully getting things into the right place before PoE 2 is released, and so the players have a good expectation of where things are going and what they're going to receive.
I want to get onto Flasks because that's a huge topic. So not only have Flask, the Flask issue effectively contributed to play hand strain, but the design intention of the entire system seems to have been lost over time. So it doesn't really seem like a very easy thing to change, though, however, because it has some really far-reaching gameplay and balance implications and intertwines with builds and all sorts of other gameplay aspects. How do you think the proposed changes are going to change the moment-to-moment gameplay of Path of Exile?
I think moment to moment, you're going to be less reliant on your flasks, they have less overall power contribution to your character, and your wrists will hurt less, I think.
That's very good to hear. I've got more questions about that later, but does the new flask charge gain balance mean that we're simply forced to use our flask more strategically as a result?
You still get a lot of flask charges. It kind of shows how bad it was that we can cut map flask charge game by 3/4 and you still get plenty. That was just to prevent it being literally free to use your flasks. But ideally, yes, there'll be a lot more strategy, especially if you choose to use enkindling orbs, because they really ramp your flasks back up to, where they were before. But in return, you don't get flask gain while the flask is active. And so that means you've got kind of super flasks that you're intentionally starved on charges, and you can choose which ones they are.
How does this affect boss fights and the flask charge gain from boss fights, or is that left unchanged?
So it will affect boss fights that have ads. If there's a bunch of monsters being spawned, they'll grant less charges. A lot of boss fights, especially newer ones, don't really have ad waves. We give you flask charges during, Cyrus fight phases, and that hasn't been changed. That's about the same. If you want to have more uptime or power during boss fights, you can use enkindling orbs if you feel that's necessary for your build. This is something we've play tested. Maybe it's a bit harder, but harder with bosses is kind of the right direction.
I noticed that some of the utility flasks in specific have been nerfed heavily, like Basalt Flask being changed to give more armor instead of mitigation for any build. Now, this whole change is a bit counter to my expectations with this systems change, as I thought Flask would be kept fairly powerful in effect, but reduced heavily in uptime. So what led to this approach of making the Flask weaker as well?
Well, there's two things going on here. We wanted more strategy and less spam, and we also wanted less overall flask power. The intention here is not just make flasks more interactive and fun, but also nerf flask power. Now, in this case, because you have enkindling orbs, you can choose between the uptime and power choice, right? If you want flasks that are weaker, that can be used quite frequently, just use them how they are. You get them still quite a lot. And if you want ones that are impactful like before, but you use less frequently and more strategically, enkindling orbs can help. And of course, instilling orbs let you trigger on conditions where it's necessary for that type of flask.
That auto-triggering of flask stuff seemed pretty interesting. Will we get a list of the sorts of things that you can trigger on?
Yeah, we'll put that together. So it's pretty cool. There's some interesting stuff there. So there's trigger on adjacent flask use and various interesting stuff like that. As well as all the conditional ones. We're not holding back on trigger on bleed, for example. All of the things that you'll need to trigger on are definitely there.
That's awesome.
This is something I thought of while that was being discussed in the video today only, but why make that an item that you craft randomly onto the flask? I know that's kind of Path of Exile style, but instead of having the auto flasking thing be something you can set up via a menu or something like that?
We don't see this as QOL. We see this as a trade-off you're making economically and for strategic reasons. And it's not too hard to find these, right? Like it's, I mean, you wouldn't set it up on every flask throughout your gameplay. Like it's an end game thing, and it does take, a bit of work to get your flasks set up how they are, but it's like GCPing your flasks, right? Like no one is complaining that it's too hard to quality their flasks up. It's the same kind of thing. It's about that much effort.
Okay.
I guess we'll see.
These new currencies, can they be used on unique flasks as well?
Yeah, unique utility flasks.
Cool. So no life flasks for those auto trigger.
We would like the enkindling and instilling orbs to work on life flasks. There are just some interesting technical challenges and balance challenges there. So we haven't been going nuts with like nerfs to how the non-utility flasks are working here, as far as I'm aware, at least. And like this question's like, if I drink
he
a
also
life
just
flask,
said
then I drink a different
GCPing your
life flask than the
flask,
third
by the
one.
way.
The way that it internally deals with those,
Obviously, Chris
game
doesn't
buffs
play the
is
game,
complicated.
guys.
So
I
when
can't
the
believe it.
buff
I
ends,
can't believe
it's
it.
hard to say which buff is ending when in various ways, and so triggering when the buff ends, which is one of our conditions, doesn't work particularly cleanly. So we've got some work to do there from a technical point of view. And then if we're allowing auto triggering and ramping of your life and mana and hybrid flasks, we certainly want to do a balance pass on those as well. But that's a future thing.
Okay. How will Pathfinder work with all of these changes?
It should be fine. It should be fine. There's a the Pathfinder is still very much focused on, essentially the more strategic flask usage. We don't want to take away from that particular build.
Will Pathfinder still be fairly piano flask oriented?
They'll have the ability to trigger where it makes sense. So if
where
your
Chris
strategy was wait until I'm
siren in head,
me and then use Storm Chain, you can of course rely on the flask triggering automatically if you choose to. And at least if there is a piano element to it for ideal play, that's something players are specifically choosing to do by specifically saying out of the 19 ascendancies, I want the one which wants me to push the keys quickly. Whereas currently one could argue that all the builds benefit from pushing the keys quickly.
Okay, so there's a big I put a note here to warn that there was a big ramble lead into this next question. So just be ready for that. But another change that was mentioned was that ailment and curse removal will now have to be done reactively rather than proactively. And if, say, like a dousing flask is used prior to being ignited, it'll have no effect. So there's a bit to unpack with this change, I think. Reactive flasking could be a really good thing for gameplay, I feel like. In some cases, for example, you're fighting a boss that ignites you, so you've got your finger hovering over the flask to get ready to douse that ignite, and that is like engaging gameplay effectively. However, there's some cases in Path of Exile where this sort of change is potentially concerning. Like, for example, you cannot anticipate being frozen sometimes when enemies have blanket added cold, or there's a mess of enemies a la Ultimatum that you cannot identify sources of potential freeze from. So are most players going to need to build freeze immunity to avoid awkward and unexpected freezing while mapping, for example?
Well, there are a lot of options here. Your first one is you can get an instilling orb to trigger on freeze. If you really don't want random freezes, then you set up your orb so that as soon as you're frozen, it unfreezes you, right? The second option is good reaction times, right? You forego having to do that, and instead, when you're
Chris
frozen, you
just
press
said,
the
"Get
button
good,
if that's
chat."
how you want to play. Then you've got alternate ways of doing freeze mitigation. There's also the Aquamarine Flask now has an implicit property of reducing like chill effects or freeze effects on you by 40%, so that will still allow you
hit
to
them with the get good.
And so there are several different ways you can deal with this, but at the end of the day, if it's a chance that monsters can freeze you based on their properties, then you have to have some way of dealing with it.
Wait, so the Aquamarine was reduced freeze effect, that means you can still do stuff while frozen? It's just slows you down instead?
Yes, you can.
Oh wow, okay. That's unexpected. So now that Flask can only be used to remove curses and not apply curse immunity, is there any plans for curse maps? Because curse maps, I feel like, were pretty painful, and we mostly just were able to ignore the problem due to curse immune flasks.
So there are now some new passive skills which affect curses that you could consider, but basically we're wanting it so that if you're playing a curse map, rather than going curses, get rid of it, you instead think about what the curse is actually doing and find some way of mitigating that particular effect on your character. This sounds like work, but it's not really that bad.
Okay. There's some
get
balancing changes prepared for or planned for ailment immunity and stuff like that, and sources of those things.
Yeah, we have done some work on ailment immunity. When we actually had a look at ailment immunity there, and this is covered in the nerfs and the manifesto.
Yeah, I guess just reroll.
There were quite a lot of very, very, very powerful ways that just trivialize the concept of having ailment immunity. So we've done some work there. Now it's a more diverse set of things players have to focus on, which is just one of the nerfs we're going to have to discuss and learn to love together.
Seems like something to expand upon in the manifesto.
Yeah, we just didn't want to turn this into a 3-hour round.
Yeah, honestly, I could talk about Flask for hours, so I'm going to move on.
No worries. And we have Royale
Um,
in 4 minutes.
I know exactly. I'm trying to I'm trying to wrap us up
We
sometime
can
around
keep
then.
chatting while they're playing Royale, though. I'll be just over here playing a bit.
We might overlap. I want to go play too, but we might overlap a little bit. So quality of life and tech issues. Can
Yes.
we expect a smoother launch and queuing experience this time around?
Yikes.
I really hope we can do. We had problems both of the last 2 launches with stuff, and we put a lot of effort into fixing this. So specifically, the problem with queuing has been completely sorted. The queue will be fast like it has been in the past. The issue that happened before cannot occur again. It is literally removed from the source code. That is not going to occur. The database problems that we had at our last launch, which are interestingly to do with page sizes in our character database for the tech guys out there. Get your page sizes right in your databases. Anyway, that is now good. We should be fine. We've put a lot of work into that. So we're expecting a very smooth launch from a technical point of view. And of course, we've learned not to give paid streamers priority to get into the game more quickly. That was a mistake and will not happen this time.
League box affinities.
If I
was
was
briefly
Ziggy,
mentioned. Does this mean
I should have
control clicking
responded.
league
Fuck.
items while in your stash will automatically transfer over to the league boxes? And does that apply retroactively to things like the heist locker as well?
Yeah, so we've enabled the affinity system for both the expedition and heist lockers. You just basically go to the heist
I
locker
figured they
and
would
turn on
address it
affinities
directly.
just like normal, and then when you're in your regular stash and you control click a heist item, it pops over there.
So good. Oh, much better. So Flask changes are a big step in reducing player hand strain, and as tradition, I'd like to also inquire as to if there's any news on the progress of improving item stacking, pickup radius, things like that.
Okay, so when we see on Reddit, someone will post, look at the amount
Oh,
of
God.
currency here, and they show
Here
a
we go.
screenshot with an absolutely unreasonable amount of currency. to
Here we
pick up,
go.
And we're like, what possibly can spawn that amount of clicking? This is ridiculous. Like, we look into it and we find, for example, so the Atlas passive, which enables King Harbingers, right? So that creates up to 4 or so King Harbingers in a map. And these dudes, for some inexplicable reason, were spawning over 60 rare monsters for the fight, right? Which is completely unreasonable each. So there's hundreds of rare monsters. And then there's like a sextant mod that says you get 3 currency item drops per rare monster. So you're getting literally multiple hundred currency item drops. It is completely reasonable to say, why do I have to pick all the stuff up? And also completely reasonable for us to fix that issue. So that particular one, the King Harbinger one, is one of the nerfs that we're doing here. But to get to your actual point, though, our philosophy here is where possible, we will stack things so that it's a couple of clicks if there are a lot of items. We don't want to have it so you have to click 15 times. 2 is enough for that. And the reason why it is 2 rather than 1 is because it is the concept of opening a trove of stuff and getting multiple piles of it out. Like, it's representing hundreds and hundreds of base items on the ground. We're coalescing breach splinters together. That was an example of something where we realized there are actually too many droppings. So we're going through and fixing this. And as we introduce
Good.
new content, we make sure to stack that. You'll notice in the footage that we released today of Expedition, you're not really
Good.
seeing more than 2 of any particular type of currency together. We've also had some interesting changes to Act Boss drops. We made them a lot better in 3.14, but we've gone through here and made them a lot better again in this patch. We've coalesced items in an interesting way where obviously with like rares and uniques and stuff, you can't stack them, but we've basically said, look, we're going to add a whole bunch to the rarity so it skews more towards getting rare and unique drops. And we're going to take away basically all of the blue items. And so now you're getting far, far, far fewer, like 50, 60% fewer items from Act Boss drops, but they're just better than they were before. And so this means that when you go and kill Katava in the campaign and stuff, you'll get a much more reasonable small pile of very good items as opposed to an entire screen full of
Interesting.
junk to look through.
Any potential on like extending pickup range or something? There's a lot of awkward situations where your character has to move that moves the labels around and things like that that make the whole experience a lot less comfortable. Even if there's not a lot of items, it can still be quite straining.
Nothing to talk about in 3.15, but this is something we are very aware of.
Good stuff. I will
Interesting.
ask that question every Q&A.
No worries.
And to just track progress. Just interested. So now that we've done this
Battle
new
Royale's
style
live
of
chat.
league announcement live streams a few times, how have you found them compared to the old media tour method?
We think it's a lot better for a few reasons. It's really good to be able to talk directly to the community. And while we loved the fact that there were so many journalists interested in explaining the information to the players, we found a good compromise between still letting journalists have some degree of early access, so they're posting their articles as we speak, but also letting us directly phrase stuff in a very specific way that PoE players will understand, so there's no room for misinterpretation. And it means that a talk like this isn't
Where
just a
we dropped it.
supplementary thing, it's the primary way
boy.
that people can find answers to these questions. And it's been a lot of work putting together these live streams. I started out working on it mostly myself, but quickly enlisted Bex and various other people to sort it out. So Bex has been primarily pushing for the live stream content and getting all the marketing stuff sorted. So
Smart.
if people on Reddit are wondering where Bex has been, the answer is very, very, very busy becoming our marketing manager, essentially.
She's been doing a fantastic job with helping get this stuff organized ahead of time.
Possibly the most organized human that I know in my life.
So Beck's moving on up there with the responsibilities and roles.
We will
Very
make sure
awesome,
that
very deserved.
she stops in for some memes from time to time so that people don't completely miss her. But it's more a matter of her training her army of juniors to make sure that their meme game is top notch. I was going to use the 100 emoji, but I realized I'm talking, so.
Oh boy.
Nice. 100. Very good. That is awesome to hear. Very well deserved for Bex. So we got a bunch of extra questions that have been sprinkled in here from chat as well. So I'm going to start working through some of these, but you folks have fun in Royale once it's up and running, which sounds like at any moment now, I think.
It should be up. I mean, assuming everyone behind me has done their job right, they should be playing Royale right now. Or there could be amazing technical problems that I'm unaware of myself, but ignorance is bliss. So throw me some more questions.
We start seeing people sprinting in the screen behind you and fire and smoke.
You see fire, yeah.
Are there party queues available for the Royale game mode?
No, there aren't. We have an experiment with some party stuff that might be happening in the future, but this is something we'd like to do. We're not philosophically against it. Just for the time being, it's solo.
Okay, cool. So potentially something to explore in the future then.
Okay, I thought something was on the camera there.
We think it's a lot of fun. We just haven't got to it yet. And it's partly because it took so much work to get Royale to the state here. Like, it's literally 30 times the effort we put into making the simple version.
I'm really looking forward to checking it out after this. Will the expedition detonation timers speed up in higher level maps and instances?
So this is a topic that even team members of ours have brought up, where when we push the plunger and there's this cool thing where it goes and explodes and it takes like 3 seconds, and we look at it and go, that's so cool, and people are going to be so unhappy at having 3 seconds of their life wasted. And so we're looking at options to make it to make the first explosion quicker. Now, once that first explosion has happened, of course, the other ones are timed fine because you have to actually fight the monsters in each wave. Like, it's like an abyss, takes a little bit of time to progress.
He ain't wrong.
It's mostly the first one where we have a cool visual feel for the theme right now, and we realize that is wasting 3 seconds of combat. So we'll find a way of making that still look good while being a bit more punchy, hopefully.
I'm so glad to get those 3 seconds back. Who am I kidding? I was just going to waste them anyway. So concerning difficulty, what about encountering the bosses? Like the look at the chance for the Taskmaster, for example? Oh, I think that's asking about like what is the chance to see the Taskmaster.
I hope he's okay.
Is that an RNG thing like we've had sometimes in the past?
So you find the bosses and
that
the
joke
expeditions generally
you know
behind certain objects, like you'll find some passageway or some fallen tree or a hole in the ground or that kind of thing. And who knows what's going to be in there? Maybe rewards, maybe bosses. And I don't know what the odds are, but I mean, my understanding is it's not meant to be incredibly, incredibly rare. Do you guys want to weigh in at all vaguely on that?
Yeah, you'll know if it's a boss chamber. You'll see it on the minimap when you get in there, so you know that it's boss time.
Mm-hmm.
But also there's going to be an implicit on the maps that says there will be a boss, so you could trade for another player for the map boss.
So the map has got an implicit mod on it that lets you see whether there's a boss there. And
yeah, that's so much for being vague
on the mini-map. So it's less of a cool secret that I was implying and more direct, which is probably what you want.
It can be a surprise, but there is also a rare outcome that you can trade for.
Got it. Right. So it can be a surprise, but you can also explicitly trade for logbooks that have the boss mentioned on them. So if you want to do bosses, you can trade for that. And if you roll a boss and you're not ready, you can, of course, trade it away.
Ace. Thanks, Rory. Have you ever thought about creating an in-game character creation tools like the PoE builder? This also, I guess, might be like, there was a thing briefly tested, actually, that was like highlighting this passive skill tree. Whatever happened to that?
There's this concept on the Tencent Chinese realm about these like recommended builds that they have each season. So when you log into Path of Exile, it gives you these 3 beginner builds and you can choose them, and they're kind of themed with various ascendancies, and it recommends a variety of passives. And this is very much kind of a choice that the Chinese publishing team have made that they feel is appropriate for their player base. The way we've kind of evolved our community with its build guides and so on works a little differently in our opinion. So we haven't rushed to put that kind of hand-holding for new players stuff in there, because there's other ways, like they can literally watch your videos to find out how to play, if you see what I mean. So it's a little different. And because of that, we have a system in there where when you have a recommended build loaded, it highlights the passives. So basically says this way, and they're marked in a certain way. And so we experimented with a system where you can create your own like layouts there. You can basically flag passives by right-clicking them or whatever, and then save these files and potentially share them. And we have that implemented. It's just a bit janky and it needs some work, and we're not entirely like we want to make a big
God,
thing
that
out
would
of it
be
if we're doing it so you can
huge.
actually share these and you have it so that if you like you go to someone's build guide and there's a downloadable thing that you get like an item filter
Ooh.
which then has the low level, medium level, high level trees, and it shows you the correct
God, I
order for
wish that was
allocating stuff
real.
and that kind of thing. It hasn't been priority number one, right? Like in that amount of effort we can get Royale up or nerf most of the game, right? Like there's a lot of other things we can be doing with our time, so it hasn't been prioritized. But yes, it is something we're aware that people want to do. It's probably never going to be a Path of Building level of build prediction. Like while tools like Path of Building are of course incredibly useful, we do want in the game client people to actually have to like kill the monsters to get their skills rather than theory craft it and then be done, if you see what I mean.
Oh, chat's cracking me up. So basically, go big or go home on that one.
Yeah, and it's just a priorities issue. Like we can, if there's enough demand for having the ability to right click a bunch of skills to lay out your build so that you don't forget what it is and then share that with other players, let us know. We'll get to it eventually.
All right.
Please
we kind of
do.
touched on this a little bit earlier, but this comment from chat's just so hilarious. So I'm going to read it out anyway. Will
Chat,
they
I'm
make
running to go use the
Feared and
restroom.
Awaken a
I've been
9
trying
weaker
to
since
hold
they
it
are giga nerfing
for an
us
hour
to
now. I'll be right
oblivion?
back.
That's a good one. Yeah, we'll see. It's not gonna. The nerfs aren't going to have that much impact on the time it takes for people to get to that content, right? Like, try it out. It's not that bad. You'll find ways around it. It's one of those things in the past where we've nerfed something massively, and it's affected the players by like 2% overall because they're just smart and work out new ways.
So basically, no. To that person.
Yeah.
Can you apply MTXs to your Royale characters, and do they stay on between games?
When we enable MTXs, we will find a way that you can have your loadout so they stay on. Currently, MTXs are not enabled in Royale, and there are two reasons for that. The first one is from a performance point of view. There's a lot of MTXs and there's a lot of players, and we don't want it so that when you run onto the screen, it slows down or doesn't draw the other player just because they're wearing a Christmas tree. And so that is something that we have to sort out. We're looking at ways. I mean, the intention is, of course, this is an unmonetized game mode. MTXs are going to be a part of it. But for the time being, they're off, so it's nice and clean. The other thing is, from a fairness point of view, MTXs do let you hide what your character is wearing, and maybe this is fine. Maybe you learn that if you're covered, the guy's covered in fire and stuff, you can't really tell what he's doing. But we do need to stop and consider this, right? This is a competitive mode. We have to make sure we understand the implications of enabling people to reskin their characters in various ways. For example, skill effects aren't that misleading. If someone uses an alternate version of Freezing Pulse, it's still Freezing Pulse and is recognizable. But by the same token, if you cover yourself in some complicated armor that prevents you knowing if the person's picked up a helmet yet, there might be some advantage there. And so we just want to have a stop and think about that when we can.
That's a really good point I didn't think about, actually, like potentially including the...
We have a vanishing die MTX that lets you hide things. So you could literally pretend to be naked while wearing pretty good items, or uniques, for example. There is certainly some degree of advantage that comes from certain MTXs. Now, maybe this is irrelevant in the grand scheme. Seems probably true for Fortnite. I don't know. I haven't played it, but we just want to make sure we do the right thing.
All right. Yeah. It's good that you're thinking about that, because I didn't even think about that.
It's actually the second time I've done that in a week.
On consoles?
No, not at the moment. And part of this is just to do with player populations. And, I'm not trying to criticize the player populations on console. I'm just noting that only a portion of Path of Exile players are choosing to engage in Royale at any one time, based on our existing data from the first weekend we ran the 2018 version. And out of those players, they're spread across many geographical reasons. If you're in Europe, you're not going to want to play against someone in Australia. And then there's time zones. And then there's the fact that most people wanting to play Royale in a Royale game currently, the matchmaking will just take far, far, far too long to actually get games to trigger. Plus, there's some work actually getting it to work on console. So for the time being, we're running it on PC. We'll see how it does. And if there's the player population to support some form of Royale on consoles, we will absolutely bring it there. We have no problem with bringing it there philosophically. We're not being blocked by the publishers bringing it there. It's entirely a matter of, it'll be super frustrating if you try to join a game and there happen to be 8 other people in Australia interested at the moment, and there's not enough to trigger it.
Is there any updates on how Path of Exile Mobile is going as well? How development of that?
It's coming along, yeah. We decided not to show any stuff yet, and that's partly because we want to ramp up the marketing towards its release as opposed to dump all the information on you now and then find out how to change it. We do have some cool stuff to show. There's the game's got its own storyline and various other interesting things that are coming along, but we're not really ready to actually show it off just yet. If people doubt that it exists, they should chat to the guys at ExileCon who spent several hours playing it and get some reassurances that there was something there.
Awesome. Are there any planned Atlas changes this week?
Not this league. I mean, there's probably a pile of nerfs just for expectations, but I say that without actually knowing. That's a joke. The
Yes,
guys are
to
smiling.
clarify.
But
It's
we
gotta
do
clarify.
have our annual in-game expansion coming in the foreseeable future that will probably contain more Atlas stuff, as people know to expect.
Can you please ask if it is possible for any character to find the winding pier? Going straight to the source for that one.
Can't comment on that.
Uh-oh.
If I get banned from my own game, it's going to be a big problem.
That would be a big problem. It even goes that high. Wow.
Yeah, I had a couple of notes, by the way, while we're talking to throw in there while we still have
absolutely.
viewers. So the first one was we changed how Spectral Helix works after we filmed all that footage. So I lied to you. So what you saw there, it's very interesting watching chat. We show Spectral Helix, and people are like, "That looks cool," and then it shows it with Multiproj, where it looks really janky, and people say that looks bad. It's amazing looking at the shift between the two. We changed how multi-proj affects it. Previously, it just caused you to throw multiple projectiles at the same time, creating this thing that A, was just bad for balance reasons, bad technically, and looked bad. We've changed it now so that A, it does more damage, right? And B, the multiple projectiles cause more terrain bounces, which actually happens quite a lot because there's occlusions everywhere. And so the skill works a little bit differently and does more damage than the version we were previously working with. And this is just due to the nature of us working on stuff for 13 weeks and having to prepare the marketing materials a few weeks out. They can change if it needs to. So Spectral Helix is now, in my opinion, a lot better. I actually kind of hated the way that Multiproj worked with it and cringed a bit when putting together that footage, but I'm happy now.
Cool.
And the other thing is, we talked about nerfing all the support gems, the damaging ones, right? And we did. That wasn't a lie. But what we forgot to mention was that we've also buffed melee skills quite a lot to compensate for the fact that they were really gutted by the support gem nerfs. So there have been quite a lot of melee skill buffs to counteract a lot of the nerfing there. Now, it's worth noting we're not trying to buff melee skills in general above where they were
Melee's
before.
still
There may
bad.
be specific buffs to specific
Okay, don't
skills,
get excited,
but
chat.
the support gem nerfing, which was hitting melee skills particularly badly, has resulted
Melee
in
is
some
still
melee buffs.
shit.
On the other hand, the spells in general are not buffed above where they were before or anything like that. There may be specific spell buffs, of course.
That seems fair. So a lot of us who have watched all of these Q&As and read your manifestos in the past, we know the answer to the question of trade, because it's already been discussed to death in the past. But a lot of people who haven't seen those, before we get frustrated with them for asking the question, are asking about trade. So could we just very quickly get a brief summary on trade changes, things like that?
We don't have any trade changes coming in this particular update here. There are two things to note with trade. The first one is, if there are things we can do that improve the trading experience that are small and prevent frustration, we'll probably work on those over time, right? We're not opposed to the idea of making trade less frustrating. We're very careful, though, that currently trade is both critically important to Path of Exile's success. We're not one of those games that doesn't allow player trade. It's so good that you can find an item and it has value. You can actually trade it with other people and feel like it's a thing that you have and you own. But on the other hand, trade is directly causing players to play the game for less time and have less fun. The retention is so much better in solo self-found. You get on average 10 times as many item upgrades per character slot when you actually have to go and find the items yourself. And so we know that if we made trade very easy, which we could in a few days make it so you literally type in the item you want, click it, you've got the item, and then there's no real need to play the game beyond a couple of upgrades to your character. And we're already seeing a bit of that with players being able to efficiently max out their character. And so it also, in that case, combined with RMT, someone sticks some money in, and before we've even found and banned the responsible people, they've got a maxed out character and had their fun for the league. It's not a particularly good situation. And so philosophically, we want to make sure that trade is possible in Path of Exile, but it is not particularly streamlined, because if it's particularly streamlined, people will just max out their characters quickly. And we think it's good that playing the game to get items is an important alternative. Now, the item system, in terms of the amount of spam of rares and various other bits and pieces in the game, isn't in a perfect state, right? We get this work that needs happening there. And so we're focusing on getting that work done so that the game itself is as compelling and rewarding as possible. Before we even consider any changes to the trade system.
I hated SSF action.
It's also worth noting that for those who look at the console or Chinese versions that have the trade market and say, we really want that, bear in mind that those players are looking at the system on the Path of Exile trade side and saying, we really want that one instead. So there are pros and cons to both systems. And we do not intend to merge the two together to make an instant
Yeah,
trade.
but those guys are idiots. I'm not
Yeah,
an
it
idiot,
seems like that trade
Chris.
system is more powerful overall
They
in terms of
are.
actually finding items.
You know what I'm
just theirs
saying?
is, like, more
Couldn't
built
be
into
me.
the actual game client.
Jeez.
Theirs has the ability to make offers and have them accepted without having to meet anyone, if you see what I mean. Which has its advantages, but it's basically the difference between easy item finding versus easy item trading, if you see. And so with our system, it's a real pain to, like, it's easy to find exactly the thing you want, but then it's a real pain to negotiate with the person and learn to speak Russian and deal with all of the issues of getting the item.
Learn to speak Russian. I'd be dope if I learned to speak Russian while playing PoE.
Path of Exile is an educational experience.
Excellent.
Help me with my maths.
Like, have plans? So quite a long time ago, you mentioned that
This is a long Q&A,
cross-instance
shit.
trading was a plan, but it seemed like that stopped being a plan. Is that still the case?
Yes, that stopped being a plan at the moment. We realized that making trade easier in that way was probably the wrong direction. And our vision, of course, in the future involves a better item situation than there is now. But we're working towards that the way we feel we should, rather than, like, honestly, if we made the trade easier, I think it would be the death of the game. And I know that sounds dramatic, but we've watched this kind of thing happen in other places, and we're very, very careful with this. Like, we designed Path of Exile to be a thing that still exists when you people are old. Like, the goal here is you started playing this in your 20s, and you will still be playing this in your 70s, and we will find a way of supporting that. And that involves not accidentally giving in to things that we really, really feel the game shouldn't have.
I hope our quality of life keeps ramping then, so that when I'm 70, I'm still feeling fresh and spry in the fingers and hands department.
Well, the Flask changes in this patch will help keep your wrists for a good few years. Still good.
Good to hear, because I plan on playing a lot this league start. So
Thanks, Ziggy.
someone wants to know, that's a long question, summarizing how's hardcore going to feel in this difficulty changes, basically.
And they're going to have more fun than before.
I know, that's kind of like the answer, isn't it? It's like,
If
hardcore's
hardcore is
getting
just
more hardcore.
If hardcore is just standard with occasional annoying deaths, that's not fun. If hardcore is an achievement where, like, I got to hardcore in 315, I got to maps in 315 hardcore, which was actually a mission, that's more fun, right? Like, it's getting to maps being an accomplishment is better bragging rights for people who are choosing that mode for bragging rights and adrenaline. We could argue that there's a vision for an even harder hardcore mode at some stage in the future. That kind of thing, with ultimate bragging rights. Like, imagine Blamped as like a regular league, for example. That kind of thing. I'm sure there'll be players who would enjoy that.
True.
Is there any performance texture plans or changes people can expect to read about more in patch notes and stuff like that?
We deployed a lot of this stuff in a engine patch a week or two ago, which has gone pretty well. There's other bits and pieces we want to fix based on people's feedback from that engine patch.
Has anyone tried that
We're trying
patch?
very hard to not have performance surprises on launch day. In addition, various issues with, like, invisible monsters and stuff at last launch are pretty resolved.
How's the new league
now.
announcement?
We have that
Lot of
particular
nerfs.
thing was a bug in the engine combined with
Big
an
nerfs.
incomplete shader gather, which we've worked out how and why both occurred and fixed them.
This league is brought
So
to you by
I expect
nerfs.
your bosses will actually do attacks you can see in this particular launch.
Fantastic. Chris, thank you so much for hanging out
Path
with
of
us today and
Nerfing.
answering a lot of questions.
You're welcome. It's been fun.
I'm going to go get ready to play some Battle Royale.
Also, Battle
I'm gonna
Royale
refresh
just went
Reddit,
live.
cry
Kel,
for a bit, and then go play some Battle Royale as well.
if you want to play.
Honestly, it's all pretty exciting. There's a lot here, and I'm pretty interested in seeing how big changes pan out. The fact that you're willing to make big changes is scary, and I mean, you can always
Yeah, they're doing
always
a bunch
look
of
back a
big
bit if you
changes,
go
that's
too
the
far, I
thing.
suppose, eh?
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. But
Oh,
I'm
you were
pretty
used in
confident
the
we've
footage,
put a
Kel.
bunch of
I'm
work
sure
into
you know
making
that
sure it's
because
the
they
right
probably
stuff, but
messaged you for
everyone, have a great time with Expedition League. It's a lot of fun.
The
Good luck with
rights,
all of those
etc., but
skills. There's a lot of new league starters to try out.
Thanks so much. See you guys later.
See you later.
All right, well, that was a lot of stuff. I feel like those are getting longer and longer every single time, in like a good way. This time I'm actually going to go and visit Reddit and not make it a goof of it. Just to see what people are saying. I'm sure it's all doom and gloom over there. Well, not really. Kind of. Not really. I do think it'll be an interesting league. They shook up enough of the meta that I actually don't know like what's gonna potentially be good, but I guess we'll see next week. I don't know. I mean, we'll kind of know, right? Because we can put it into Path of Building. So, yeah. We'll see. We'll see. All right, no worries, Co. I'll just be chilling in Discord and probably live with Final Fantasy. Then we can just swap over real quick. Won't be a big deal. Anyways, that's it for this react video to the 3.15 expansion announcement. Thank you guys for watching over there on the YouTubes. We'll see you in the league next week. We will be doing a sponsored stream at the start of the league, just like the last ones. This time with no streamer queue, as they said it's gone. Good. We removed ourselves from it last time. But, yeah. I think that league looks interesting. I think some of the new skills look very good. I think you're going to see a lot of Winter Orb stuff. That totem thing, the totem that can use slam skills or whatever, that looks very good. Yeah, it looks good. It looks good. Also, they just hosted Mathel. What the hell? Mathel has a beard? All right, I got to get out of here. Evil Mathel's on my stream. I can't believe that he went evil. It's crazy. It's crazy. That's it though. That's it. Thank you. Hit the follow button, or subscribe rather on YouTube. Make sure you like the video and comment too as well. Love to hear your thoughts. We'll see you next time for more PoE stuff.